Okay, so I saw this over on CBS Sports, the ACC's new incentive model. Now, we talked about this. Now, I know John Sarian, he's already got on to me in the chat, and he said, Morgan, I really, and he said, really don't want to talk about this. Now, I know that there's a lot of Clemson fans out there that are basically done with this kind of topic, but it is really the off season. So we have to think about things that we are going to talk about that are the most important right now. And one of those things is that revenue distribution model that the ACC is going to start, not this year. We know that, right? They're not going to start it this year, but they're going to incentivize postseason for their members of the universities or of the conference. So starting in 2024 and 2025, there'll be success incentives. And this was approved by the ACC Board of Directors this week. And it'll potentially open up $10 million more for those teams that make it into the postseason. Now, right now, I think I said this to Faxon on the radio this morning. My first thought is, sounds like a Band-Aid to me. Houston, when you think about your first thoughts on this, do you feel like sounds like a Band-Aid to you, or what are you thinking?
So first off, and I meant to say this at the beginning to both you and Faxon, happy birthday to both of you.
My dad's birthday, though. It's my dad's.
Oh, okay. Well, I saw something about birthday, so happy birthday to him as well. Yeah, it's a Band-Aid. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It just kind of feels like, and this exact same scenario happened in the Big 12, where you had uneven revenue distribution. It really made a lot of people mad. And then you see what happened. The ultimate downfall, A&M, Colorado, and Missouri leave. And then now you have Texas and Oklahoma leaving. And I mean, I think that was the minimum option that this band of seven, magnificent seven, was looking for in this. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of teams, at least in that southern portion of the ACC, that are looking for ways out, because it's a pretty big chunk of revenue. And even for basketball, look, North Carolina's got a vested interest in this too, because football kind of helps them out with basketball as well. Basketball can't carry everything, but they got to keep up with the Joneses. And you've seen in the last few years the SEC and the Big Ten really pushing to bolster their brands in basketball. So it's going to affect everybody in the ACC. Is there going to be a change in conference in the next few years? Probably not. But this is we're at the point now where Thanos has the time stone, and Doctor Strange says we're in the end game now. That's kind of where we're at.
Oh my goodness! Bringing out the Avengers, Thanos, and oh man, and Infinity Stones. It's about to be over with for the ACC, or at least the way we've seen it. I'll be honest with you. I don't see it as it being completely destroyed, because I think the ACC is actually in a very good spot because everybody's stuck. And that's my thing, is that, yeah, you're not in the situation of the Pac-12. In my opinion, the Pac-12 is just about done. They don't have ESPN anymore, and they're entertaining USA Network, which is decent. That's wrestling, that's WWE, Monday Night Raw, that's the Premier League, as you know. But the thing is, it's still USA. It's cable. It's not your primetime networks. It's not your local networks. So you do have to have that package that includes it. Whereas the other channels you'll be able to get it with ABC, with CBS and things like that. NBC, Fox. So it's not as good, but I will tell you that the ACC is basically in a position where it's like, go ahead, and to me, I feel like they're saying, go ahead and try something. There's nothing you can do, because if there was something you can do, I feel like that can do would have happened. I don't think that there is something that you can do. I really, honestly, Houston, I hate to be a naysayer here, but as a Clemson fan, I'm actually one of those Clemson fans that says to myself, I don't think that Clemson is the bright and shiny diamond that everybody thinks they are to the SEC. The SEC already has a team in South Carolina. They already have a team in Florida. So they don't need to penetrate that market. But it would be nice to have a brand like Florida State and Clemson. Believe me, Florida State and Clemson are huge brands when it comes to college football, college baseball, even college basketball. And now we're seeing in college softball, track and field, soccer, huge brands. Don't get me wrong. But they already have teams in there, and they're not in the position where they have to add anything. So they're in a position where maybe they want Clemson, but there's no sense of urgency. To me, I don't see any sense of urgency on the SEC side of things. Now, on the flip side, I see a sense of urgency on the Big Ten side. I think the Big Ten would say, hey, I want to go into the South. I want to get into that market. They've already said they want to get into the West Coast market and be more of a global or a national brand. I feel like that they may be interested in getting to a Southern market. We'll see. I don't know. That's just my speculation there. But I do feel like the ACC is in a good spot as a conference because they've kind of got you by the golden handcuffs. There's nothing you can really do. You're stuck right now. What they decided to do was put a wet Band-Aid on it. Will it last for 5 or 6 years? Maybe so. Maybe the schools will then get frustrated again and decide to pony up the money. But that's a lot of money. If you're only losing, and Houston, you've said this to me many times, if you're only down a couple of $1 million, it's not that big of a disparity. I think where they're really nervous is if the other schools around them, especially their rivals, are $50 million ahead of them. That's where it gets scary. Now, every year, South Carolina gets $1 million here, more or there. That's not a big deal. So if Clemson keeps going to the postseason and keeps getting that extra incentive, then, I think maybe the gap's not that bad. Maybe they can make it through. If you think about it, you divide, 150 by 13 years, and there's only a $1 million gap between you and your nearest rivals, then maybe it's better to just tough it out. But if that gap gets really big and it looks like to the point where it's better to just buy out, that's, I think, where the ACC is going to start to tumble. But again, the ACC has announced their incentive model, their revenue-based model, where the high-achieving programs are going to get additional money, upwards to $10 million or more to distribute. Everybody's going to get their normal revenue, and then they're going to get more, those teams that do best in the postseason, not just football postseason, but basketball postseason as well. Jim Phillips, the commissioner, said he's been exploring all options to enhance the membership institutions. Here's another part of this, Houston. How much does this hurt teams that have never been in it and are going to continue to not be in it? I mean, if I'm a team like a Georgia Tech or a Boston College or a Virginia, maybe Virginia could make it because of basketball. But if I'm these teams, I mean, Wake Forest says they want to be in it. Wake Forest is really pushing to get into the postseason. But, there's plenty of teams that are kind of not really doing very good on either basketball or football. What happens to those teams? I mean, look at Louisville, for example. They're going through a downtime right now. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe it'll be fluctuating here and there. But majority of the teams are not going to make it to the postseason in football, especially in the ACC. Majority of the teams may be able to make it in the ACC. They might be majority or at least half of the teams make it into the ACC or the NCAA basketball tournament, but it'd still be difficult, right? So what about that bottom part of the teams? Most of the leagues are top heavy. Even in the SEC, they don't want to admit it, but most of these leagues are top heavy. So what happens to those smaller schools? Do they just get slowly bled out to where everybody else gets the money? I mean, it doesn't seem very fair to me for a team like Rutgers to get $75 million no matter what their performance is, and then Pittsburgh get less money because they're not performing well only because they're in the ACC.
Yeah, and I think the way that I look at this is like there's tiers, right? There's an upper tier that it's going to be unaffected, like the Clemson and Florida State. I feel like Miami, even though they're not back, like they're not, what they were in the early 2000s, they still are a national brand. People still watch them. If they make it to the ACC championship game in the next 3 or 4 years, and that would probably get them in a 12-team playoff, they'll be fine. I'm almost to the point with North Carolina. North Carolina has that type of brand. Matt Brown's kind of brought them back if they make it to the playoff in a 12-team playoff once every 5 years, they'll be okay. The middle teams, the Virginia Techs, the Louisvilles, the NC States of the world, that's got to be frustrating because you're trying to aspire to get to that level of Clemson and Florida State and Miami, especially like in North Carolina. I can see where there would be some contempt for teams like that for somebody like North Carolina or Miami, especially when you're carrying the weight. But it's a weird situation. The conference it's the most unique of all of them because you have football schools, but you also have several that can kind of hold their own in basketball, right? North Carolina, Virginia, Duke, not really perennial football powers, but they are elite basketball schools. And then you also have other schools like Miami and Virginia Tech and Louisville, who are also very good. Louisville's, a very good program. The schools that are the most at risk are probably Georgia Tech and Boston College, because even though they're in large markets, Georgia Tech is not even the biggest fan base in their own city. You're getting out recruited by Georgia and Clemson, and literally any Southern team is coming into your town and just picking people out. And it's squeezed them out of their own market. So they're not as marketable as what they used to be. And then with Boston, it's nice. It's a cool campus, cool trip up to Boston every year. But if you ask Boston fans who they cheer for in college football, they're generally going to look at you in a blank stare or tell you Notre Dame. And so those are the two types of schools. I think at least with Wake Forest at least has a proud heritage in both football and basketball and baseball to make some moves. So Wake Forest could have a Sweet 16 year come out of nowhere or play for an ACC title if Clemson's down and Florida State's down. We've seen that happen a couple of times. I think Wake Forest is going to be frustrated with the end result for the conference, but I don't think revenue is going to be – they're going to be relatively unaffected. I think they're going to be in that middle tier with everybody who's kind of frustrated.
Yeah, I do feel like that there's a lot of schools out there that are going to be very frustrated with where they're at right now. And as it continues to keep going, it's just going to continue to get worse for those teams, especially at the bottom of the conference. There was another article that just recently came out on CBSSports.com, and that was let me bring it up here real quick. So CBSSports.com. And it was regarding the Big 12. As Dennis Dodd came out earlier today, inside the Big 12's ironclad grant of rights contract that helped keep the ACC together amid turbulence. How a seemingly unbreakable document has kept two leagues largely together during realignment. And some of the bullet points here for you. Okay, Houston, you ready for this? Let's talk through them. The Big 12 and the ACC grant of rights contracts are, quote, ironclad and have helped keep the two conferences stable during realignment. The contracts are based on a landmark Supreme Court case, let me speak correctly here, that allows conferences to sue schools that leave early. So they could be sued if they leave early, and they could demand that money that we've been talking about, that $150 million. Also, the contracts, I didn't know this before, contracts are incorporated in the state of Delaware, which is a business-friendly state and makes it very difficult for anyone that's not a business or to break it to challenge it in court. So there's another thing that really kind of makes it ACC-friendly. The contracts have been successful in preventing the schools in the Big 12 and the ACC from leaving, but they did also create some pretty bad resentment among the schools who are feeling that they now are being held back. The revenue model is hopefully going to achieve this, bridge that gap. The contracts the contract for the Big 12 was signed in 2012 and runs through 2025. The ACC grant of rights was signed in 2016 and runs through 2036. Wow. So a 20-year deal there when they originally signed it. Now, I was trying to explain this to my wife while we were driving home, at the time, Houston, I don't think anybody really felt like it was a bad deal. Clemson had just lost, I believe, Maryland. Is that right? Or someone, they were losing teams. And so they were worried to do whatever they could to make it ironclad. But, I mean, looking back, it would have been much better to make it a 10-year deal than a 20-year deal.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, the resentment side of that is something that I think that's going to play out in one way or another. I don't know about the Big 12. I can't speak for that. I feel like the Big 12 is going to set themselves up to be the like catch-all, the safety net for programs that are at least decent brands. So if, you know, nuclear winter happens and people start moving to different conferences, the Big 12 is going to be there to grab the, you know, the Louisvilles and the NC States or whoever doesn't go or however it's set up. But you're right. And that's why I'm saying, even though they can't find anything, you don't think that 8 teams, at least in this conference, are a little bit ill with what's going on. I wouldn't be surprised we're going to have to wait, but you're going to start to hear these rumblings again at the beginning of next decade, and then boom, especially if there's a major gap. I don't know. I think this kind of made a lot of people mad, and I think that growing sentiment's going to boil over soon. But I don't even know how that's going to look. College football is going to look completely different in a decade. So projecting what's going to happen in 2036, I can't tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, again, I think this is a Band-Aid. If anything you could call it, I think you could call it a wet Band-Aid, because I don't think it's going to stick for very long. It'll just get them over for the next couple of years, and then they'll be probably back at the table saying, hey, where's our money? Hey, our rivals are doing better than us financially, and we're having to fight our way to a championship just to keep up, and we're still not keeping up. I think it's just going to continue to get larger and larger. But I do feel like that, again, going back to, Clemson and Florida State should just go to the SEC. In my opinion, we really haven't seen a ton of public acknowledgement that the SEC is like clamoring for Clemson right now.
Right now, no, but I guarantee you if the talks intensify to the Big Ten trying to encroach their territory, I have a hard time believing that the SEC would allow them to snatch up some major brands, especially in the Carolinas and Florida. Georgia Tech, whatever, Boston College, sure, but, the pitch for some of these schools to the SEC would be, you're not just getting these football programs, you're getting programs that can compete every season. Right, Florida, between Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, and Miami, they're going to be getting something. And then, I don't know how many teams are going to come along, but pitch different things. If you wanted to bring Duke along, you're going to have the biggest basketball rivalry along with your biggest football rivalry, right? So right now there is no urgency. You're right. The SEC isn't urgent. They're fine. They're making money. But to go back to your point, this isn't about market share anymore. It's about brand capturing as many brands as you can. Kind of like Disney Plus. Like Disney went out and got Star Wars and Marvel and all this. And if the time comes where, hey, Grand Rights is going to be up, let's see if we can make a volley to get the biggest names in the ACC, Clemson, Florida State, UNC, whoever. Let's do it. And let's see how it goes. But again, I don't know what's going to look like in 10 years. Something could go crazy and something completely different could happen. So I don't know.